raise your hand if you think you create content. Now, hopefully everybody raised their hands, and hopefully nobody got in a car accident or people are staring at you weird now because you have your hands up. You can put your hands down. The correct answer is you all create content, whether it's long form or whether it's social media. It's how you interact with other people. And today, we're going to talk about how you can do that even better. Joining us for our conversation today is Ben Nussbaum. He is NACS Publisher and Editor-in-Chief and oversees content development at NACS. So we've had other people from his department on the podcast over the last couple months, years, and it's like, we haven't had Ben on? This is not good. We got Ben on. So we have Ben on. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Thank you, Jeff. And for those of you who don't know, Jeff is my manager, so we talk every day. I believe this is our first time that our conversation has ever been recorded.
Yeah. So we'll try to keep it on the up and up and worth recording. But want to start with just like when you interviewed for the NACS job a couple of years ago, just a slight detour. One of the things you were super proud of was you worked in the industry before you came here. And that's actually one of the selling points or intrigued you about being at NACS. So before we get into the content, give us your backstory about, your involvement in the industry and why that's important.
I like to say I've been in the industry 30 years. I just took a 27-year break. Many years ago, 19 years old, worked at a Kum Go in Grinnell, Iowa. Memory's a little fuzzy that far back ago, but I think I worked there for about 6 months. So about 3 months full-time during the summer, and then 3 months part-time during the school year. It gives me a great window into how much the industry has changed. Because at that Kum Go, I believe I worked from 3 to 11. Right. So from 3 to 5, there was another person in the building with me. From 5 until 11, it was just me. And it was pretty simple, right? Like we didn't have any food service. I ran the cash register. People were nice. Life was easy. No problems. I had to keep an eye on the forecourt. We had some kind of machine where I had to approve credit card transactions and turn the pump on. So basically I'm standing there looking at the forecourt, turning the machine on and off, and occasionally, bringing up a pack of cigarettes or a soda pop or whatever it might be. Food service, we did have coffee, and I think we had cold dispense, but then sometimes we would get a box of a dozen donuts, and that would be on the counter, and that was pretty much the food service program.
So a lot of people in our industry, they talk about, part of our industry is selling products, and some of it is just communicating. And you hear from various celebrities. Steve Carell worked in a convenience store, and he said he came up with some of his characters that he's used over his career because he worked at a Store 24 in Massachusetts and just kind of would see regulars on a daily basis and kind of connected with them and amplify, this thing or that thing that makes it a little bit funnier or a little bit realer, a little bit more serious or whatever it is. But our business is also a communications business. How do we separate ourselves when there's 152,000 convenience stores out there, when there's all kinds of other convenient locations? You got to have a story, and you got to tell that story to people, whether it's advertising, whether it's social media, whether it's your website. And the idea of when the oversight of not having Ben on is the recent NACS magazine, NACS Daily, had an article where Ben picked out his 5 favorite stories for the year, except they weren't 5. There were more than 5, and that's a good thing. So when you wrote the article, what were you thinking behind all of this? When you look at favorite stories, what makes a favorite story, and why did it resonate with you? So, let's set that up, just basically big picture, and then we can dive into a couple and then talk about some other things.
Yeah, I think the ones that jumped out to me, it is kind of a grab bag, right, of different kind of types of content. We've got a Q&A. We actually have two Q&As. We've got some profiles. We've got other kinds of content. The mission is always tell people something they don't know, right? So I think these stood out to me as interesting for myself personally, right? Kind of a different angle into a topic, and something hopefully our readers will really enjoy. I think another theme for these articles, they really showcase the operators, right? And typically retailers, sometimes suppliers, kind of the grit and creativity of those people. Sitting at NACS Media, this is a world that is full of opportunity from a content standpoint, right? It's an opportunity-rich environment. You've got, I think almost 3 million people work in this industry just in the U.S. That's not including global, right? So just so many stories to tell about people who are making it work with kind of grit and creativity. That's the theme I'd go back to with the stories that kind of were my favorites.
So you said, tip number one for people out there that are writing content, tell people something they don't know. So I would imagine one of your beefs is when somebody starts a story, as you probably know, blah, 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 or they start a story with stating the obvious that is just extra words that cost ink or pixels.
That is true. Yep. And another pet peeve would be in today's world.
Yeah, I might even be guilty of that one. So I never really thought about that. If it's not yesterday's world, it's not tomorrow's world. It's today's world, and people kind of know that.
Presumably, our audience is living in today's world, so we don't need to tell them.
So when you talked about your favorite articles, there seemed to be, like you had talked about, there's a little bit of disparate or grab bag, if you will, but there seemed to be like a real connection with at least two of them. You wrote the article about celebrating state associations, which you talked about. It really showed you how important they are on the local and state level in telling our industry story in these zoning meetings across the country, or town halls, or whatever it is. And the other one that ties to that is we had a member of Congress that was interviewed in the NACS magazine last year, because for a quarter of a century he worked in the industry. So there seemed to be some commonalities with those two in terms of the importance of telling your story and having people understand your story who are elected leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. The state association article, that was super fun to write. So I talked to the heads of the state associations / regional associations for New England, Arkansas, and Arizona. And I talked to all of them within probably about a week of each other. And it was this great window into how different their worlds are, right? I mean, the issues, Peter Brennan heads up New England. The challenges he has are just so different than Steve Good, who heads up Arkansas. Amanda Gray heads up Arizona. Her world is just completely different than those two, right? So, I've been in NACS 3 years, and it is sort of a process of like really discerning the full ecosystem here, right? And state associations are a pretty significant part of that ecosystem. So it's super cool to put a spotlight on those guys. New England is tough. I personally love New England. It's a tough place to do business. It's a tough place to have an association. 6 different states and, different municipalities are advancing regulation too. So they're really on the front lines, day to day, tracking what's happening, showing up in town meetings across Massachusetts. The generational tobacco bans are a big deal there. And so they might get very little advance notice that they have to show up and fight one of these bans in whatever town in Massachusetts. Arizona is super interesting. Most of their fuel comes from California, which means essentially they have to closely monitor California. They can't really advocate too much in California. So they're a little bit of just kind of a unique situation there, trying to monitor that state and keep abreast and influence it to whatever extent they're able to. Arkansas seems like a great business climate.
Yeah, and until it isn't with Arkansas, until you have something where it's like, okay, all hands on deck, let's go at it, and let's solve this problem, and it's just constant communications, and I think that's also what your article showcased is like, you have to tell your story, you have to, and one of the things that I'd like to talk about a little with you is when you create stories, you oversee all kinds of NACS content, and you've done this for decades, other previous jobs. You have to define, here's a topic I think will be interesting months from now, because we have long lead times in print, much shorter in online. But what will continue to be interesting? How can we find interesting people to talk about it? And how do we edit and take the copy in such a way that we're teaching somebody something they didn't know? That's a lot to take on. And any tricks of the trade that you have seen that could guide people, whether they're doing social media or whether they're doing a newsletter or something like that?
Yeah, I've got some bullets here. Advice for content creators. And of course, Jeff, this is what you do too. So curious to see your take on some of these. I'll go through the bullets. Let me know what you think. All right. So number one, voice. You want to give it voice, but the voice can't get in the way. And that is really tricky for people who don't have a lot of experience with this. Sometimes there is no voice. Sometimes all you have is voice and no content. But you want voice that serves the end user, right? So
Yeah,
one of the
when you mean voice, you mean like using I or me or something like that, or just the perspective of a human being as opposed to something that is reporting as if it's a emotionless type
personality
situation. Yeah,
personality, right? So it could be first person. It doesn't have to be first person. Super relevant for things like social media or content like blog content, that type of thing. Anything that kind of moves more into the content marketing or straight up marketing. You want it to have personality, but the personality has to serve the end user. So I'd point out Chrissy Blazinski. She did a fantastic job of that with one of the articles I put on my list, her kind of tribute to Henry Armour, right? Like that is full of personality. You can tell, you and I can tell immediately Chrissy wrote that, even if her name wasn't on it. But that kind of voice and personality is in the service of the content.
and that's the December NACS magazine in print and online. And I agree with you on that. She starts out by saying, I've known him for 20 years. And then I don't want to say she disappeared into the story, but you could feel that the story was about him and not her. But it was about the connection that he has established with so many people in our industry, including her. And that was how she pulled her voice in there, as opposed to saying, look, I know Henry. It was more, this is the effect that Henry's had on people over the last several decades.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she did a great job with that. Kind of related to the concept of voice, don't over edit, which is, again, super, super tricky for people who don't have a ton of experience, but you don't want to smooth things out too much, right? You want to fix it, but don't rewrite it or break it or rethink it too much if you don't have to. Think about your favorite movie. Jeff, what is your favorite movie?
Oh, I don't know. You can't put me on the spot. I haven't gone to a movie theater in years. But I think I know where you're going with this.
So let's say, we'll just pretend your favorite movie is Pulp Fiction, right?
Okay. I did see it.
Say, if Pulp Fiction went through 5 different people who each got to change whatever they were most offended by or whatever didn't make sense to them, you would end up with just a sad little nub of a movie, right? When you're creating content, kind of let it breathe, let it have that voice, let it have that personality, but fine tune it and tighten it. Did you come up with what your favorite movie is?
Oh no, we're gonna have to edit this. You're gonna hear like a different voice, like I'll record something
Right.
like in a week, and it's gonna be like, "It's a Wonderful Life," and then I'll talk about like all those scenes or something like that.
Yeah. I've got, so I was actually talking with some friends of mine last night who are in this space, and they gave me the tip, don't be boring, which I would not have thought of on my own, but it's an awesome one just to flag. Right? And it kind of ties into voice, kind of ties into tell people something they don't know. It's always shocking to me how people sometimes create content that is a little bit boring, right? They're checking boxes and they think they're doing it the right way. But you have to kind of breathe that life into it.
And along those lines, I had a conversation with somebody a while back, and he was really struggling to write an article. And he's a good writer, but and then person said, "Hey, can you take a look at this?" And I said, "I won't. I'll try not to use the person's name. Let's just say his name's John Smith. It reads like Professor Smith wrote this, not John." And what my equivalent of that is not only don't be boring, but you don't have to be professorial or anything like that. Just write, and there's a reason that you're writing. And if it seems like you're not having a good time writing, it will come through in your work. So what you want to do is you want to get yourself to a place where, yes, it's still a task. I don't know how many people come by it easy. It's still, there's work involved, but you wanted to make it feel like it has been fun to do this, like it was there was joy associated with writing this, that you enjoyed doing it, as opposed to, good thing I'm done with that.
Yeah, I agree. And my advice would be make sure that you've really digested the content and understand the content, and then have fun writing it. Right? If you're kind of laboring to understand it and put it together as you write, it's not gonna work out that great. All right, some other kind of bullet points here. You want to respect people's time and intelligence, but also make it easy for them, which is another one of those like real balancing acts, right? Like, is there anything in there that they might need to know or that they don't understand? But you also just want to respect their intelligence and understand that they already know massive amounts that you don't need to explain to them.
So that would apply. I know one of the various things that people will say is the average American reads at, 8th grade, 9th grade level, something like that. And you're supposed to write not over their heads. But what you're talking about is you don't have to explain that food service involved prepared food and commissary and hot, frozen, and cold dispensed beverages. They're in the industry. If we're writing for the industry, you don't need to say that. If you're talking to a customer, you don't need to describe what a typical convenience store looks like. They're probably aware of that. But it's so there's times to simplify, and then there's times where it's like you're just wasting their time in simplifying.
Exactly. We don't need to tell people food service is becoming more important. Right?
I think I'm guilty of that one too. Now more than ever today, food service is important.
But I'll give you an example. This is a very minute example, but kind of a quandary we have sometimes is, do we need to define QSR, or can we just use that acronym? Do we really need to define it across every single time we use it across all of the NACS media platforms? Or do 98% of our readers know QSR and just that term is what they use in their daily life? So typically we don't feel like we need to spell out quick service restaurant. Every once in a while we do, but that's an example. I've got another one. It's okay to repeat yourself. Right? I think that's where sometimes people go wrong. It's good to repeat yourself. Right? People are super busy and they don't have time and they don't carefully study every social media post or every article. So you're actually doing people a service to kind of repeat yourself and come back to the same themes. And if there's something important, you can, mention it multiple times in different formats.
Which is essentially what advertising's all about. Yes, there are some commercials that come on way too much, and they're a turnoff. But the idea of repetition in advertising is so you follow the message, and I think that's also something that I'm sometimes guilty of. Somebody will say, "Did you hear about whatever?" And it's like, "Yeah, we wrote about it in NACS Daily 14 days ago," and it's like, well, that doesn't mean that person didn't see it 14 days ago. So if it's important, let's reference it another time. Let's make sure the word gets out there. Let's make sure that if people need to see it, it's not just one and done.
Exactly. There are a lot of balancing acts, right? Like, how much voice is too much? How much explanation is too much? How much repetition is too much repetition? But you do need to kind of come back and you can say things multiple times. And then I've got one more bullet point. In today's world,
yes, now more than ever.
Yeah, in the age of AI, right? You lean into human and authentic. So even within the world of NACS, one thing that we're going to change heading into 2026 is more bylined content, right? We're going to foreground that this is coming from an actual human, and here's their photo, and here's their little bio, and here's everything else that they've written. So leaning into that human element, I think is definitely important.
I remember the first time I read in something that was somebody wrote with AI, and my first reaction was, "Wow, this is really good." And then somebody who's a little bit more familiar with AI than me, it's like, "Oh, that's so AI," and there were too many adjectives, too many adverbs upon further reading, and there were a lot of words, but it didn't really say anything. And I think that's the importance of the human, and then having the byline to say, look, this was thoughtfully crafted. This wasn't a word soup, salad, whatever. That just has a bunch of things that now more than ever in today's world, et cetera, et cetera. So you had mentioned Henry Armour, and for the last 3 years, you sit right next to him. And that doesn't mean I'm not going like, what do you hear through the walls? But there are times where I've known him for 20 some years. So there are times where we're in the office late or early, and just your next office to him. Was there anything that you've seen over the years with him with communications where it's just like, that's the way it should be done? And that was a great reminder.
Yeah. I'm curious your take, because you've worked with him 20 years and I've sat next to his office 3 years, and he's on the road, vast amounts. One of my favorite Henry moments, and I think it was still pretty early in my time at NACS, but he hadn't been in the office for a couple weeks. And I think you and I were both working late on a Friday, and totally out of the blue, Henry Armour strides in late on a Friday. We leave. I assume he just sits at his computer and works ferociously. And he's also not in the next week either, right? Like a little glimpse into just his work ethic, right? And the craziness of the schedule and his drive to work and put in time and kind of be where he needs to be. But I think to get back to the, Henry communication, one thing I always appreciated about Henry was how human he was, which that actually ties in with everything we've been talking about, right? Voice and personality, and don't be boring, right? If Henry gets up in front of a crowd and talks for an hour, it's going to be a very human presentation, right? Like you'll feel like Henry a little bit. He might kind of throw in some colorful expressions. But you feel like it's a human up there who completely knows what he's talking about. He's completely digested the content, right? And he's having fun sharing all that with you, right? Like it just kind of flows out. I think Another one is sort of he, from my perception of Henry, he's always kind of craving contact with people, right? And I don't know if that's who he is as a person or if it's sort of who he is as a leader, but he's always sort of looking to have that engagement with people, right? And it could be 5 minutes, it could be an hour, it could just be shaking your hand, but he wants that kind of human-to-human connection.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you just said. And I think that he would say he's not a naturally gifted communicator. He says he works at it. And the part that he works at is the part that you started talking about at the beginning, which is have a voice. When he pulls together thoughts, he keeps the end user in mind. Why is this person listening to me now? And that's what the conversation should be all based upon. Not, there's certain people, you talk to them and they talk and talk and talk, and it's like, why are you talking to me? You could be talking to that person, that person, that person. But how do you target to the people when you're talking to somebody? How do they know that you're talking to them? Because this is customized for them. It could be individually one-on-one. It could be 5 people. It could be 1,000 people. And I think that's what he was really good at, and taking that step back and saying, why am I talking to this person, group, etc., and then crafting something that way. And not just like, okay, I'm just wind me up and I can do it. He can, but he likes to take that step back and organize for, what's the so what in all this. So that's one thing I've always noticed. I've learned from him and from others here at NACS that take time for people, because it's pretty easy. We get busy and it's like, yeah, I don't get time for that. And I'm guilty of saying that, and showing that, even if I'm not saying it. But take time for people. And, you'd be surprised. I've had conversations over the years where somebody said, I really appreciate you took those 2 minutes. And it's like, I don't even remember doing that. But I would imagine that if I didn't take those 2 minutes, they'd also remember that and they'd have a different impression of me. So all that goes a long ways. And basically the idea is the line that you consistently tell us is create compelling content. And you gave some bullet points on how to do that. But that's, I think, well, not that's what I think. That is what we'll be doing much more of in 2026 through our various content platforms. We talked a little bit about phrases that are out. Do you have any suggestions for phrases that are in, or words that will be in, that we want to focus on this coming year?
It's a good question. I can give you a little bit of a preview of some of the magazine content that we're looking for. And anyone listening, send me a note, Nussbaum@convenience.org, or news@convenience. Or if you send a note to anybody you know at NACS, I'm sure it will end up with me if it's related to content. AI is still a big deal. We've moved from, what is AI, or 7 ways AI might change your business, to much more kind of concrete and specific articles about AI. So in the February issue, we'll have an article on how chefs are using AI for menu development, for example. Right? I'm sure we'll cover AI for loss prevention at some point. That's a super interesting topic. So AI is still, huge. Just as we kind of increase our coverage of it, it gets more and more niche-y and more kind of how do you use AI in these particular granular situations. Personally, I'm still fascinated by frontline workers and content around the frontline worker. How do you find them, train them, retain them, motivate them, coach them up? So, definitely looking for more content around that theme. I'll give a quick shout out to our department faces of the industry. If you've got a frontline worker who would love to be profiled in NACS magazine, reach out. Those have been super fun to work on. Obviously foot traffic and forecourt conversion, big topics right now. I was really interested that one of the top sessions at NACS show. One of the top education sessions was on negotiation. So looking to, one, we're actually going to create content around negotiation, but potentially more content around kind of business skills in general, with a little bit of relationship to the, tying it back into convenience, but kind of these broader skills that are useful for everybody. And we'll have a little bit more fuels coverage. Do you want to give a little preview of additional fuels coverage?
Well, what we've done over the last couple of years is we've had fuels coverage with our consumer surveys, and we're going to be rolling fuels market news, which we had as a property for 5 years. We're folding that, and we're moving some of that fuels content into NACS Magazine, into NACS Daily, online under the Fuels Resource Center, et cetera, because fuels, those are the top hits online. Obviously, in the Daily, we have stories, and you can tell what the top stories are. You're probably the ones clicking on them and say, yeah. But anyway, fuels is super popular. It is we sell 80% of the fuels in the country. It is something that we always get a lot of traction. And so we know it's important to keep writing about it. And it seems like, what can you possibly write about fuels? There's 3 grades, et cetera, but there's a lot of nuance in how you mentioned AI, how everything is changing from what it was a decade or more ago when people went to your store because of the gas price sign. And now they're making decisions on where they buy fuel before they get in their car. And that's an area that we're going to explore more in these surveys, and I think elsewhere within NACS. So the gas price sign is, yes, still important, just like when the fuel light comes on, that's important. But how do you get them to proactively think about your store, whether it's for food, fuel, or something else? Friendliness, that's the 3 Fs. But yeah, I'm looking forward to what we're going to be covering in 2026 and beyond. And I look forward to you editing my work and making it better. And if you can figure out how to edit this podcast and just say, I changed that, maybe we'll have like an editor's issue where you're able to say, yeah, I wouldn't have done that, Jeff.
Well, my friends who I was with last night, one of their pieces of advice is, if you're telling a long story and you just need to wrap it up, you say, and then I found $5.
And what does that do?
It ends the story on a high note.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess with the way things are today, what if you say I found 500 pennies? Would that be better?
That would be, yeah. Collector's item.
And then I found $5. Okay. Well, Ben, I think we both found $5.
Great. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks for being on today, and thank you all for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.